Hi everyone, my name is John Berggren, and Professor Quant asked me to come speak with you guys today and chat about some of the work I do and some of my experience as it relates to water policy and water conservation in the West. And so I'm super excited to be here. I just want to say and acknowledge that this is weird. I've never done a lecture like this before, and I'm sure it's all weird and new to you all as well. And so just want to acknowledge how challenging this is for everyone and doing the best we can. And so I hope this goes well, but I apologize if anything's not clear. I'll include my contact information, and please don't hesitate to follow up if you have any questions or want to chat more about this stuff. So yeah, like I said, my name is John. I have a PhD in water policy from the University of Colorado at Boulder. That's actually how I know Professor Quant from. We were both in the same program here in environmental studies. I'm still in Boulder, and I work for a conservation nonprofit group called Western Resource Advocates. Been doing that for almost 2 years now, coming up on 2 years. And I'll tell you a little bit more about some of that work and what we do as an organization and what I do. And just to give a little more background and context, my PhD in grad school was on the Colorado River and how Colorado River policies are developed and managed and how we can think about them in terms of equity and sustainability. And so I'll get into a little bit more about that later on. So that's my background, that's who I am. So I'm gonna share the screen now. So like I said, Western Resource Advocates, we're a conservation nonprofit. We work in three kind of main areas, well, four areas, really three. That's clean energy, so we have a whole clean energy program. I'm a part of our Healthy Rivers program, and then we have a kind of Western Lands Clean Air program focused on land conservation and what that means for clean air. Certainly our biggest program is our clean energy, followed by our Healthy Rivers, and then we're trying to grow and develop our Western Lands and land conservation program. So we're headquartered here in Boulder, Colorado, but we have offices around the West. We work in 7 Western interior states, and we have offices in Boulder, like I said, and then Denver, Santa Fe, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Carson City, Nevada. And so we work on all these issues around the West. Western Research Advocates has been around for 30 years. Just last year, celebrated our 30-year anniversary. And the Healthy Rivers program that I'm a part of has been around for just over 20 years. So it's a great organization. I'm super happy to get a job and be working with them. And so yeah, we got this. Our whole website talks more about what we do and some of the projects we work on and everything. So please don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions about who we are and what we do. So my specific role is I'm a water policy analyst, like I said, in our Healthy Rivers program. And within the Healthy Rivers program, we have 3 main areas. So one is keeping water in rivers and lakes, and what can we do to make sure that our rivers and lakes aren't further degraded or further harmed with growing populations, with changing climate. How do we really keep those riparian ecosystems healthy? We have a big protecting the Colorado River component. I'm sure you all are aware of the Colorado River and its importance, and I'll get into a little bit of that later. I'm sure Professor Kwan has covered some of that already. And so we work on Colorado River issues. And then finally, we have a water conservation and efficiency program. And this is really focused on the urban conservation side. So our cities, where people live, how can we think about increasing water conservation and efficiency? And that's really where I spend most of my time, is on the water conservation and efficiency side. And this takes a variety of approaches, and it's a variety of projects. I've certainly learned a lot since being here in just under 2 years. But broadly speaking, it's how do we, like I said, how do we make our communities more water efficient? I'm sure you're all aware that the Western United States has some of the fastest growing communities in the country. And with all that growth, how do you ensure that it's happening in a way that doesn't further strain our water supplies? And in fact, can we do it in a way that puts water back into our rivers and lakes for purely for environmental and riparian reasons. And so what a lot of other folks have found, and what we really focus on, is that you can actually grow and without needing additional water supplies. That's not always the case, but often it is. And not only can you grow without needing additional water supplies, but you can actually grow and reduce your overall demand. So we've seen this across the West. There are many cases where cities have grown exponentially. Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Denver have just grown significantly, and their overall water demands really haven't gone up, and in some cases they actually gone down. And so it's really impressive what some communities have done, but we try to push them further all the time, and really want to make the entire Colorado River Basin, the entire Western United States, be in a spot where we have our growing communities, but they aren't further stressing our water supplies, and in fact, they might even be returning some water to our rivers and lakes. So this takes a variety of methods and approaches. Just taking one, for example, performance contracting for public buildings. This is a big 3-year project that just wrapped up last year. Performance contracting is just a tool to incentivize retrofits in big buildings, often, in this case, it was hospitals, government buildings, schools, universities, that sort of thing. And it's a way to basically fund upgrades and retrofits and efficiency improvements to those existing buildings. And it brings in a finance mechanism. There's a way to pay back those loans, and then there's a way to the building actually gets the retrofit. So it's this somewhat complicated policy tool that we have been pushing here in Colorado to get these retrofits done in big buildings. And so it's a pretty cool tool. Definitely check that out if you're interested in that kind of finance mechanism. There's rainwater harvesting. Colorado was the last state in the entire country to legalize rainwater harvesting until a couple of years ago. We helped get that legalized here in Colorado. Water connection charges are basically anytime you build a new building, whether it's a home or a big institution, you have to pay for a connection, which is basically the water utility will charge you to bring those services to this new building. So in order to get water at your new house or your new office building, the utility actually needs to dig the trench, bring the pipes, do all that to this new building, and they charge a water connection fee, also known as a tap fee. And what we did is we looked at that and realized that you can actually incentivize more efficient buildings by playing with that water connection fee. So if you can tell a developer, hey, if you are willing to install really water efficient fixtures in your toilets and your showers and your washing machines, and you are willing to do really efficient outdoor landscapes, we'll actually reduce this water connection charge and charge you less, knowing that you're going to use less water. And it's pretty impactful. The water connection charges can be, for a single family home, in some places they're as high as $50,000 or $60,000. And so if you're able to bring that down a little bit by encouraging more water efficient buildings, developers definitely take advantage of it. So there's a whole bunch of different ways we look at urban conservation and urban efficiency and try to push it around the West. Like I said, we also do some regional work with the Colorado River. There have been some, I'm not sure if you all are aware, but there's been some agreements in the last couple of years that have been made around protecting the 2 big reservoirs in the Colorado River system, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. They're called the drought contingency plans, also known as the DCPs. So my organization was involved in looking at those and thinking about shortages and how those DCPs will be operated and implemented. And then finally, it's not captured here on the screen, but we also do some state policy work. And so we will advocate for various water efficiency policies at the state level. While a lot of it happens at the local level, there's certainly a role for states around the West. And I'll get into an example here in a little bit about one that we helped with here in Colorado. So that's kind of our Healthy Rivers program, what I do, how we work and how we operate, and some of the tools and methods we use to improve water efficiency around the West. So Professor Quant wanted me to answer, the question why water policy is important. Why should we care about water policy? Um, and I think fundamentally it's because here in the arid and semi-arid Southwest, in the Southwest United States, water supplies are in fact limited. We don't have unlimited water, and we've seen that in many cases where rivers have been stressed to the breaking point. The most prominent one I'm sure you all are aware of is the fact that the Colorado River no longer reaches the sea. And so this is the Colorado River down in Mexico. This is we're looking north, so we're just Arizona is just up there a little bit, and this is the Colorado River coming in, flowing south. And this dam called Morelos Dam is the last major dam on the Colorado River. So this is Mexico's dam, and they divert and take their full Colorado River allocation, which is coming out of the left side here, and that's into all its canals and aqueducts and um, irrigation structures to grow for agriculture in the Mexicali Valley. And you'll notice that what's left of the river is basically nothing. There's a little trickle right down here in the lower right-hand side, and that's what the Colorado River becomes just over the border in Mexico. And so we fundamentally use more water in the system than the river's there, and accordingly the river gets pretty significantly impacted. And we see this around the West, both in terms of quantity and low flows and rivers not being at their historical capacity, and then also in terms of water quality issues and water temperature issues. And so we're basically straining our rivers and water supplies to the breaking point, and that's where water policy comes in. How do we protect those rivers, restore those rivers, and do it in a way that doesn't impede growth? We're like I said before, you can definitely still grow. There's just smarter ways to do it, and there's ways to do it that don't require significant new diversions, new structures, new dams. You can do it in a really water smart way. The other thing that's important, I think, about water policy is water and rivers, by their very nature, connect both people and nature at a whole different scales, from the local, the state, to the regional, to the national, and the international. See here, so river map go. There we go. The Colorado River starts up here in Colorado, but it flows down into Utah and then Arizona, Nevada, California, and then eventually into Mexico. And so it connects people across these different scales and different states and different regions. And for example, as I'm sure you all are aware, that in San Diego, about half of your water supply comes from the Colorado River, and it's actually moved through the Colorado River Aqueduct. And then there's a regional water agency called Metropolitan that manages that, and then that supplies San Diego with about half of its water supply. So water that you're drinking there in San Diego comes from a place, I looked this up, 72 miles just that way from me is the headwaters of the Colorado River in Rocky Mountain National Park. And so I can almost see the mountains from my house, and that trickles down, flows into the Colorado River, and then it goes down and supplies water in your region. So it's just really, really interconnected thing, and it's pretty impressive what rivers do. And then, another reason water policy is important is water is essential for basically all aspects of life, from your drinking water, turning on your taps and having your water that you can drink, and for growing food in our agriculture, to energy production. Producing our electricity requires enormous amounts of water. And so thinking about how that water is managed and conserved is really important, and has implications for energy. And there's industrial uses, and lots of manufacturing uses a significant amount of water. And we have recreation and tourism. It's a multi-billion-dollar economy in the West, from anything from river rafting to fly fishing to kayaking, canoeing. There's significant recreational and tourism opportunities with our rivers in the West. There's culture built around rivers. People really appreciate having a beautiful, healthy, free-flowing river in their backyard. And we see more and more communities around the West are taking advantage of these amazing rivers, and doing more river-oriented development, and really having the river be the focal point. And there's social impacts as well. We, like I said, really, for the most part, really appreciate rivers and really love rivers. And so for all those reasons, water policy is really important, and a good way for figuring out ways to protect those rivers and protect those things that we love. So I've kind of alluded to this, but in terms of the policies that I work on, like I said, it goes anywhere from local policies all the way to regional and national policies. At the local scale, we work with a lot of municipalities and local governments on things like new ordinances and new regulations and new codes. So I'm currently working on a project helping a community here in Colorado develop a gray water ordinance. It's called a laundry to landscape system. And basically it's a homeowner can install a little collection device on the back of their washing machine. And during the summer months, they can actually pipe that out to their yard and use that, the outflow from your washing machine to irrigate shrubs and trees and other things in your yard. And so instead of just having that water from your washing machine just go down the drain and go into the stormwater system or go into the wastewater system, you can actually reuse it, so you get multiple benefits for it. So that's one example of a local policy. Another one is we're helping another town here in Colorado update their landscape regulations. They are seeing a lot of growth, and they want to make sure that their growth is done in a water efficient way. And so we are helping them modify and update those landscape regulations so they're more water efficient, and so they can continue to grow without using additional water supplies. So like I said, we also work at the state level in terms of developing water policies. We just recently in this latest legislative session helped pass a bill that I'll come back to here in a sec, but basically it's a way to encourage more communities to include water in their big picture planning or their comprehensive plans. But I'll come back to that in a sec. And then we also have work on regional policies, like I mentioned. So with the Colorado River, like I said before, there's a whole bunch of agreements that were made in the last few years called the drought contingency plans. And then there's a really big decision coming up with the Colorado River in the next couple of years. In 2007, let's see if I have in 2007, they adopted what's known as the Colorado River Interim Guidelines. And basically this controlled or directed how Lake Mead and Lake Powell were actually managed and what shortages would occur at various elevation levels for the lower basin states. And so this was a big deal. This happened in 2007. It was a multi-year negotiation. And basically what it says is if Lake Powell's at a certain level and Lake Mead's at a certain level, you have these level of either normal operations or shortages in different releases from Lake Powell. And so it's kind of a complicated policy scheme, but basically what it does is try to prevent catastrophic shortages in both these reservoirs so that our main water supply, the Colorado River, is still usable and it can still actually flow downstream to the users and to the different states. When they passed this policy in 2007, they said it was an interim agreement, so it had a defined lifetime, and basically it's good through 2026. But to renegotiate it, because it's done in 2026, we have to start up this year, 2020, or officially 2021, but we're spinning it up in 2020 to direct those renegotiations. And so the renegotiations of these interim guidelines is going to be a big deal for the entire Colorado River Basin for the next couple of years as we try and think about, did this original policy work? What did work? What didn't work? Who was involved in creating it, what stakeholders were there, who wasn't there. And so we Western Resource Advocates as an organization is going to really try and help direct these renegotiations and make sure that environmental concerns are represented at the table. And so this is going to be a big one going forward. And if you haven't heard about this, I'm sure you will in the news the next couple of years as these renegotiations spin up. So in terms of the people that we work with or that I work with, it kind of runs the gamut all the way from federal government. So I work a lot with people at the Bureau of Reclamation who manages a lot of our water infrastructure here in the West. There's a whole bunch of Bureau of Reclamation folks here in Boulder and then throughout the basin. So we work with those folks quite a bit. We work a lot with people at the state level. So here in Colorado, it's the Colorado Water Conservation Board. we have good relationships with their conservation folks, and we apply for grants from them, and they fund a lot of our work. And so we work with the state folks, and also thinking about state policy. We work with the state agencies. We work with a lot of the big irrigation, conservancy, water districts. There's a big one here in Colorado called Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, and we help them push their members to be more water efficient. We help them think about policies that could help their members be more water efficient. And so, yeah, it's a range of those different conservancy districts. An example would be down in your region is the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, also known as MET. They're a major player, and I don't work with them too much directly, but it's similar types of conservancy districts in other parts of the basin. We work with water utilities. Like I was mentioning earlier, some of those system connection charges or tap fees, we help water utilities, write those tap fees and develop those tap fees to encourage more water conservation. We work with local governments like counties, municipalities, to pass various ordinances and code revisions to encourage water conservation. We work with universities, different professors, research institutes, anyone who's kind of interested in the water conservation, water efficiency space we tend to work with. And then there's a lot of other NGOs that we also work with. The Sonoran Institute, the Water Now Alliance. There's just all sorts of NGOs in this water conservation space. Trout Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy, Audubon Society, Environmental Defense Fund. There's just a whole host of NGOs. And so we have pretty good relationships with all of them. We often collaborate. We have NGO groups that work on specific water policy topics, depending on our expertise. And so that's a really good, interesting relationship with the other NGOs. So Professor Quant wanted me to just mention some recent successes that we've had. And I alluded to this earlier, but I want to come back to it. There's a state policy that here in Colorado we helped, we supported as it got passed through the state legislature and signed into law by our governor right before the pandemic started, and they had to shut everything down. So we were pretty happy about that. But basically what this bill was most communities, local governments, so municipalities and counties, develop and write and implement what are known as comprehensive plans or master plans. And so what these master plans or comprehensive plans are, or comp plans as they're often known as, what they do is they provide a high level vision, goals, direction for your community. So they outline how we're going to grow. What does our growth want to look like? What kind of community we want to be? Do we want to incentivize a certain kind of growth or discourage another kind? Do we want more recreation? Do we want more agriculture? So all these big picture things go into a comp plan, and a comp plan is usually updated or revised every 5 to 10 years. So it's a big process, but it basically directs growth for the next 5 to 10 years. Here in Colorado, the only thing that was required for a local government to include in their comprehensive plan was a recreation and tourism element. That was the only thing the state said you have to include, is a recreation and tourism element. Well, we and some of our partners thought we should also require a water element. And here in Colorado, water is a big deal. We're expecting shortages. All communities should be planning for water. And so we wanted to have that be the second requirement for the state, is if you're going to do a comp plan update, you have to include a water element. And so we worked with various partners and actually got that through the legislature. We provided information, educational materials to state legislators, PDFs, little one-pagers. We met with folks. We did behind the scenes stuff. We did some public stuff. I testified before a Senate agricultural committee about the importance of this bill. And so we kind of watched it through the whole process, and it made it through relatively easy. We were a little concerned at one point we were going to get some opposition, but it ended up working out and was signed into law about just over a month ago by the governor here. And so that was a pretty cool thing to see. It was fun to see that happen, and now communities will have to think about water in their comp plan updates whenever they do them. So and conversely, Professor Kwantmani, you mentioned any challenges we've had, and one of the bigger challenges was related to this comp plan bill, in that when we set out in the fall to push for it, it was a full-on requirement. So the state would require you to include a water element in your comp plan. And through various stakeholder outreach, talking to key organizations, key political organizations, we got some pushback, and it ended up being that it's voluntary for a community to include water in their comp plan, but the bill now authorizes it, so it gives the community legal cover to do it. And if they do it, then they have to include conservation as that part of that water element. So it's a little convoluted, it's a little weird, but basically it's not required, but if they do it, they have to think about conservation. And that was a bit of a letdown. I'm glad it passed and it's in the law, and we can maybe build on in future years, but that was a little disappointing to see that get watered down, pun intended. And then, I had some other challenges to talk about, but, most prominently right now, it's the COVID-19 challenges. And, we're seeing internally, challenges with our funders. We're a grant funded organization, but then also with our partners, with our water utility partners, they're depending on how they're funded, might be seeing revenue cuts, and we're seeing local governments really struggle with sales tax revenues and other types of revenues to pay for their programs. And so it's just going to be a big challenge going forward to figure out what happens both during this pandemic and afterwards in terms of water and water conservation. So we shall see. That's a big question. So one of the other things that Professor Quant wanted me to touch on was just any recommendations I have for undergrad students that are interested in a water conservation career. My number one suggestion is just trying to get experience however you can. Internships, volunteering. Not only do you gain good experience, but you're starting to network. And just speaking from the NGO experience, we're an NGO. We don't have a ton of money to hire new positions, but we often take on interns and volunteers. And so if there's an NGO that does work that you're interested in, there's plenty down in the Southern California area. Reach out to them, find out if they're doing an internship program, and if they're accept volunteers. And it's just a great way to get that experience, learn more about what they do, what type of work they do, learn to speak their language, learn to know the staff. Any experience you can get, even if it's unpaid, most likely unpaid, right at the beginning, that's just all going to build your network. It's going to build your resume and make it so much easier to eventually get a job that that pays and you're really interested in. So that experience is just really important, and build out that resume as much as possible. One other thing I recommend is definitely consider grad school, either a master's or a PhD or both. It just really helps. A lot of organizations require masters for a lot of jobs. PhDs definitely help as well. And try not to think of it as purely an academic exercise. If you want to go into water conservation work or water policy work, you can tailor your master's thesis or your PhD dissertation towards the work that you want to do. So if you're really interested in urban conservation, you do your master's thesis on urban conservation, on a case study of a particular water utility, and you do that research and you build those relationships. And so, really taking advantage of grad school to build out that network, to gain that experience, not just from an academic perspective, but from a real world, from a more empirical aspect that really helps gain that experience. And then, like I said, when you go to apply for a job, you're in a much better shape to get hired. Also think about, if you're interested in this field, is there a place or an organization or agency you don't necessarily want to spend your whole career at, but would be interesting to gain that experience. So let's say you want to work for an NGO working on water conservation, maybe consider looking at a water utility. and spend a few years working for the utility, managing water systems, managing those programs. And you gain all that experience, you learn how they work from the inside, and then you can transition to what you really want to do, working for an NGO on water conservation issues, and you'll bring that just wealth of experience from the utility to the NGO, and just be that much more useful. You'll be more likely to get a job. And so just thinking about how do I get experience that might not be my dream job, my ultimate career, but use it in a way to build that experience for the job that you really do want to get to. So one of the last questions that Professor Quant wanted me to touch on was just what can students be doing now to help conserve our water resources in the West? And my number one answer to this question is always just get to know your water system wherever you are. Either, if you're at school, how does your university get its water? If you're back home or you're not from Southern California, where does that water come from? Just learn about it and learn. Most utilities have resources about where your water comes from. And the more you know about where it comes from, how it gets there, what is required to get it there, the more educated you are, the more you're able to communicate with people in your family and your friends about the importance of water conservation. If you can explain that, all your water comes from that mountain over there, and climate change is reducing the snowpack, and it just helps people connect a kind of obscure thing, water coming out of their tap, to a real world example. And so just getting to know your water system is a really, really great way to help think about conservation of our water resources. And one of the coolest things you can do, I'm a big fan of this, is see if your local water treatment facility or your local wastewater treatment facility gives tours. Most will give a tour, and they're free, and you just have to coordinate with one of their staff. But really seeing how they'll take raw water and treat it to drinkable standards and then distribute that throughout the system. Seeing those big facilities is just super cool, and a fun way to learn about water and how precious and important it is. And even the wastewater treatment facilities, it might sound gross, and it's really only gross for like the first section, and then after you get past that, it doesn't stink anymore. And it's really interesting that you can take raw sewage and basically treat it almost to drinkable standards, and you can dump it back in a river. It's just fascinating to see. So I highly recommend those types of tours. They're pretty fun. Get a group of friends and go take a tour of wastewater treatment facility. It's super cool. And the other thing is just think about or do some research if there's any water policy discussions happening with your municipality, with your county. What's going on? You can look at your municipality's comprehensive plan and see if it has a water element. What does it say? Does it have a conservation element? Does it say that your city wants to conserve water going forward? Is your city thinking about adjusting its water rates and learning about that process? And most cities have public hearings, public ability for public to provide input, and just getting involved in learning what your system is doing, what your municipality is doing, is a great way for you to get involved in terms of conservation of water resources in the West. And it's just you'll be more informed, you'll have a better understanding of the system, and accordingly you'll be able to better help the system. And so if more folks like yourself are able to be knowledgeable and get involved in water issues, we're all going to be in a better spot. And so that would be my number one suggestion for how you as a student can actually help out and get to know and learn and inform this our water resources here in the West. So just to wrap up, I want to thank you all for having me today. And like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or you want to chat. I'm actually just going to pull up my email real quick. So there's my email, john.berggren@westernresources.org. I'm always happy to chat both about water, but also if, like, careers in water. If you want to talk about what you want to do after graduating, I'm happy to chat about that as well. And so just in sum, I'll say that there's lots of really cool and innovative things happening with water in the West, and we're seeing it new policies getting developed, new things getting done, and they're making an impact, and they're actually making a difference, both big picture Colorado River stuff all the way down to local municipalities. And so it's a great time to get involved. It's only going to become more important, especially with climate change. And so I'm really optimistic about where water in the West is going, and I think it's going to continue in the right direction. Keep an eye out for those interim guideline renegotiations for the Colorado River that I mentioned earlier. That's going to be a really interesting discussion here in the coming years. And if you want to follow that, that actually gets a decent amount of media coverage, and so you can follow it in your local papers. And then finally, just on a personal level and what's going on with the world and this pandemic, and it's wild and crazy. And I'll say, I'm optimistic. I think we'll get through it. Just, from my experience, I graduated from college in 2007, and shortly thereafter we hit the 2008 economic collapse, and it sucked, and I couldn't get jobs, and no one responded to me. I ended up working in a climbing gym and doing odds and ends, and it wasn't ideal. And so I understand maybe some of the anxiety you might be feeling about graduating here in the next year or two. And so all I can say is, we'll get through this. You'll get through this. Like I said, I graduated in 2007. I didn't get this dream job of mine until 2018. So it took some time. But I am hopeful, and just want to say thank you so much, and good luck with everything. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. So thank you so much, and thanks to Professor Pont for inviting me, and I hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.